We are all just one bad decision from incarceration. We're here at Noah's Halfway House in Tampa, Florida, where thousands of ex-convicts come to transition from institutionalized prison life back into society after spending 30, 40, even 50 years in prison. Hi, I'm Chris Wolf. So please join us as we go inside and speak to one of the men who's been recently paroled. Timothy Kane. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you for having me, sir.
If I go back and think about your life, you had a pretty normal childhood. You were born in Chicago, you were raised in Central Florida, and then your parents divorced when you were 12 years old and you moved to Newport Richey, correct?
That's correct.
When you were 7 or 8 years old, I believe you met a young man at the time named Bobby Garner. Who was he in your life?
Well, he was a good friend of both me and my older brother we all went to the same bus stop. So he's the same age as my older brother and was in the same grade. So we became friends then at 7 when he was 10, at the same age as my older brother. But really the link that brought us mostly together was he had a video game system at that time when it was relatively new. So I spent a lot of time over there playing video games.
So Super Bowl weekend 1992, I believe you were staying with your father and then you rode your bike 14 miles to his house?
I was living with my mother in Newport Richey. He did live in Hudson, and I did ride my bike after school on Friday to his house to spend the weekend, which was a 3-day weekend. We were doing like what we normally do, playing video games, that kind of thing. The Super Bowl had just started.
Let's talk a little bit about what happened on the Super Bowl weekend in 1992. I believe you had ridden your bike to Bobby Garner's house, and there's 5 of you.
Alvin had brought up the conversation of breaking into a house. The reason why they had picked that house, Bobby at one time had lived on that same street, and so did another kid that was there, Chris Walker, who was 16 at that time. They both lived on that same street, but they thought that they would be able to Alvin thought they would be able to get something of substantial value, knowing they had a boat, satellite dish, a nice car, that there would be things of value.
You were the youngest of 5. How old was Bobby Garner?
He was 17.
Alvin Morton?
19.
Okay, and then the other 2
were 16 and 15.
So they decided we're not going to go in, so now it's just the 3 of you go up to the door.
Yeah.
And you're like peer pressured, you didn't really want to do this.
Well, it kind of came to a head when the 2 said they weren't going to go in, how Alvin started berating them. And in that you have to make a decision. Like, I don't have a place to go home. Mike Rocky, the 15-year-old,
right.
he lived a street over, so he was going home.
Right, you're 14, this guy's 19, that's a big age difference. What happens? Alvin Morton, he goes up, he just kicks the door in.
He went in the house was dark. I could see a nightlight in the kitchen, but I couldn't see anything else in the house when we went in. Once Alvin did go into the house, Bobby kind of pushed me from behind in and closed the door over. And then immediately a man's voice came and said, "What's going on out there?" Immediately when I heard the voice, I looked at the door. The door's closed, so I just looked for nearest place to hide. And the first place I saw was like the dining room table. So Alvin, as soon as I get under the table, I look and I can see Alvin standing in the kitchen next to the refrigerator, and he has a gun. And he made the man get on the floor, and the man's just saying, "Don't hurt me. You can take anything you want," that kind of thing. And then his mother, obviously the woman that was in the house too, came out, and she was kind of not aware of the situation at all. Like, and the son who was older gentleman, just helped her to get to the floor. Just lay down, Mom.
He was in his late 50s, she was in her 70s?
Yeah.
Okay.
But she was not aware of what the situation was and the gravity of it.
So in a matter of moments, I believe, Alvin put a shotgun to the man's head and pulled the trigger.
Yes, but it didn't happen like within 1 minute. There was a dialogue back and forth between the couple and him, and Bobby and Alvin kind of conferred, you know, they kind of went towards the door and started talking to each other. And I got up. That's when I got out from underneath the table, and I told him, you know, I want to go.
Out.
I want to go. And he's like, no one's going anywhere. And it was almost immediately after that, I kind of made my way to the door still. And before I even could get to the door, I heard a shotgun blast. At the sound of the blast, I turned and looked, and from the distance I could see Alvin did try to swing the gun at the woman, and it must have jammed or whatever because it didn't work. And him and Bobby, I don't know who initiated, but they were kind of over top of her, and they had stabbing her, you know, because I guess the gun didn't work. I don't know how that really went down from the distance where I was standing. At this point, everything's like slow motion from the shotgun blast. The smell and the sound ringing in my ears. It's kind of like a dream. The only light in the house is a nightlight in the kitchen around the corner. So it's all very surreal.
What's going through your mind?
I was paralyzed at that point. I was like in fear. I don't know how to process even now looking back at it. Like, there are so many things I wish I'd have done differently. Like, I would have never went to the house. But I mean, in the same breath, it's like in that moment, I don't know what I could have did different.
Where'd you guys all go?
So once I got to the end of the street and found my bike in the bushes and stuff, and I pulled it out, I got to immediately, the first place I thought of was at Bobby's house, because it was right around the corner, a couple blocks down, and I knew where it was. I wish I'd have went towards my house, which would have been take a right instead of a left, but in doing that, I ran into Chris Walker, who was one of the 5 that
decided not to go in.
He was at that corner, and he stopped me, and he asked me what happened, and he saw how shaken up was, and he tell what happened, you know, and I couldn't even talk. And before I knew it, they'd already caught up to us, and you know, he ushered us, me, Chris, and Bobby. Alvin told us we're all just going to go to Bobby's house
because Alvin Morton.
Yes.
He was still trying to control everybody and control the situation.
He definitely had control of the situation at this point by just fear, you know. Well, we go to Bobby's house first, and he hides the gun and cleans himself up, I guess. And then he says, this is what we're doing. We're going to go to this guy's house, Jeff Madden, who lives near Hudson Beach, and then we're going to go to my house. No one's going home.
The one thing that he did, because he was trying to prove to other people how tough he was, he actually cut the finger off the male victim, correct?
He did.
And what was do you know why he did that?
Oh, well, from what I've learned is that he was proving that he is capable of doing something like he did, and that he could kill somebody.
But you guys all got caught very quickly. Why do you think you got caught so quickly?
Well, there was another person in the room when he told Jeff what he did and showed him the evidence of that, the proof of what he did.
The man's finger.
Exactly. And that other boy, who was like 15 or 16, called his brother and told him what he saw, and the brother lived in the neighborhood, so he went and checked the house and saw that there was smoke coming out, so he called the fire department. So the next morning, it wasn't even light yet, I heard the phone ringing. We're all in Alvin's room, me, Chris Walker, and Bobby and Alvin. I heard the phone ring. I heard it ring multiple times. I hear Alvin pick up the phone, and he says some things and hangs up and leaves the room. He's gone from the room for a few minutes, and then the phone starts ringing again and again and again and again. It just keeps ringing until Bobby picked up the phone this time, and I hear him saying, you know, yes sir, yes sir.
Who was he talking to?
I obviously the
police
outside. They already had the house surrounded, and they called.
They had the house surrounded where you were staying.
Yes. So he told, when he hung up, he said, listen, they're outside. They want us to come out with our hands up, you know. So I grabbed my shoes, and we walked to the front door and walked out the house. And it was just me, Bobby, and Chris. Alvin was nowhere to be seen. So he hid somewhere, I guess, and they found him, I don't know, later the next day or whatever, in the attic under the insulation or something, you know, but...
Now, I believe, if I fast forward, I believe Alvin was convicted on two counts of first-degree murder.
He was.
Is he still on death row?
As far as I know, sir.
He's still on death row. And then Robert Garner, what happened to him?
He has 2 life sentences running consecutive.
Not on death row?
No.
And then Chris Walker?
Chris Walker, as far as I know, got out within 4 or 5 years.
And then other than you.
Yeah.
So here you are, you're 14 years old, you're in county jail. What was that like?
Well, at first it was, the disbelief of what I'd seen happen. The more traumatic experience was even in the juvenile detention center. I didn't go immediately to the county jail. It took like a week or two to adjudicate it, to go through the hearings to adjudicate us as adults. But that first night in that cell, with the solid steel door and the light that never turned off.
This was when they took you in for the initial question.
Yeah, the same night that this happened. After questioning, they took us to the juvenile detention center, and being in that cell alone, where they make you strip down to your underwear before they close the door behind you, and all you have in there is a steel toilet, a blanket, and a pillow, and a mattress.
And I'm guessing it was probably very cold.
And it was cold, but it wasn't that. It was like the trauma of just being in a dark room by yourself now, after seeing what you saw and not being able to process what's going on. And I had the thought in my mind at this time, they had told my parents that once they catch Alvin and apprehend him, because he had made threats, according to my statement, that they would, let me go.
Right.
But the next morning, they take us all to the courthouse, and they adjudicate us all and charge us with all the first-degree murder.
Let's talk about your actual trial. Did you have a court-appointed lawyer?
I did have a court-appointed attorney.
Did you feel that you were represented well?
At the time, I did. Mr. Folk, he said he actually had a son my age, so he not only did relate to what teenage kids are capable of and how they can make a mistake, but that like he felt like it's hard to fathom that the way they were holding me accountable for something that seemed beyond my control. But his explanation of the felony murder rule did tell me in great the possibility of actually being convicted of murder. Like I did at one point understand that this could happen. Like he made it clear they can get this conviction.
Because of the felony murder rule, it was pretty black and white.
Yeah, and he said not only can they get this conviction, this is the only sentence they can give you if they get this conviction is a life sentence with a mandatory 25 years.
Right, that's what they have to give you. Were you surprised when the jury came back with 2 first-degree murder convictions, guilty?
Not necessarily, because my lawyer did that. That's one thing I will say Mr. Folk actually did very well, is prepare me for the reality of the possibility and what to expect.
So now you're 16 years old. Two years have passed by, and you've been found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. What was going through your mind when you had to stand in front of a judge and the judge said, I sentence you to 2 life sentences? Is that how it went?
Yeah. I can't even replay that in my mind. Not saying that I blacked it out, but I do remember my grandma and my mother crying, and they were allowed to hug me in the courtroom, which I hadn't had a hug from them in over 2 years. So I do remember that, but in the same, I don't remember like what I was exactly thinking. After being convicted, I knew what the sentence was going to be. So it wasn't like, I guess that's why, because I had a week or maybe even a month between the conviction and the sentencing. So in my mind, I already
you knew what was coming.
I knew exactly what was next. Yeah. So
here you are. You're 16 years old. It's off to prison, Lake Butler Reception Center. But prior to this, religion became a big part of your life.
So September 12th, 1993 was the exact day. I do remember it. Over a year and a half being in the county jail, I found myself in a confinement cell, and the circumstances that led me to being in that confinement cell were absurd, to say the least. But that's not to say, it seems to me now, looking back, that it was an appointed situation where I had to be alone for this stretch of period. The reality of what I was facing, like, this is where it began to, I guess I began to mature and really realize, it sank in, the possibility of what could be for the rest of my life. I don't want to sound like I was suicidal, but I couldn't find a reason to live anymore. Like I didn't know the meaning of life, and now having it forfeit, I couldn't distract myself or anything from what I was thinking and feeling. And the only thing I had in the cell available to seem to offer a distraction was a Bible that was offered by a man who came in, just volunteered at the jail to offer Bible studies, who was an ex-biker, had tattoos and war stories, that we did go out when I was in the pod, open population, that just to get out of the pod. But you could tell he was warm and that he loved us kids, just
Right.
because he did. But he made sure we had a Bible, and that Bible spoke to me in that some of the things he said about how he had so much conflict in his life and how he found resolution in this man Jesus. And he said, you just got to read, you got to see him for yourself. And picking up that Bible that day changed my worldview, my life, and how I even handled the going through the rest.
And from that moment, that became the basis of your life, and it sort of, as you say, guided you through your 25 years in prison.
Absolutely.
Tim, how did you survive 25 years in Florida's violent prisons?
In hindsight, it looked kind of easy, just one step at a time, just paying attention to who's around you, what you're doing. I guess after the incident of what took place at 14, the way I approached making decisions going forward absolutely changed, in that I thought things through, probably even more so than I needed to, but in regards to how this can affect the next 5 minutes or an hour or tomorrow, so I lived like that. When you go into prison, I didn't ask people what they're in there for. And I just began to see individuals as they were, as they present themselves to me. So I knew I had a story and I knew what led me there. So I never immediately assumed anything about anyone in regards to why they're there, and I took them at face value. People are people. And I knew in my situation, I had changed. I believed I was saved, and that I was a new creature. And and a lot of brothers that I met in there, I knew they were changed too. From some of the stories that they did share and what you see as them there, they were different people. And it was because, in my opinion, Jesus, their encounter with Jesus and their walk of life and however they met him, changed them fundamentally and drastically. So,
and when we talk about your transition, it's interesting because you weren't at the Dr. Regina Sheeran's corrections transition program very long. You were. They realized they needed to let you out, that you probably shouldn't have been sentenced the way you were. So when your 25 years came up, they sort of put you through the corrections transition program as just a. How would you describe that?
An interesting thing happened in my initial parole hearing. When I came up for my initial review at the 25-year mark, when they had my initial hearing, the sitting district attorney for Pasco and Pinellas County, which I was prosecuted out of Pasco County, went to my parole hearing. And the people who were helping represent me at my parole hearing actually thought he was going to be there in opposition. But little do they know, he actually sat in and said that if this case was handled in what his opinion is properly 25 years ago, we wouldn't even be having this discussion here today. I hope and pray that you would be lenient and at the earliest possible convenience, see him out.
You were paroled and released on February 23rd of 2017. What was that like?
That day forever will always be remembered to me, in that the light at the end of the tunnel, this is really happening. I remember when they took my going home photo, and the lady says, all right, you can't smile. Can't smile like you were, because I was grinning ear to ear when she's taking my EOS photo. And I said, I can't help it. I can't stop it, because you just thinking this is not just a dream anymore. It's actually going to be a reality. I'm going to walk out gates and I'm going to be able to pick and choose the color of clothes I wear or what I'm going to have for dinner tonight,
Biggest wow since you've been out?
Too many to count, sir. I had to learn to drive. I learned to drive here in Tampa in 275. That was a big wow.
What advice do you have for parents, teachers, and teenagers about breaking the law and being with others who break the law?
Well, for teenagers, the parents are critical in realizing who your son's associating with. Your kids are going to be subject to mistakes, and they're going to make mistakes, but don't allow your kids to be around people that are going to be more than capable of not only making mistakes, but bringing your kid in with them. In this day and age, it's so much different than it was in when we were kids growing up. But I don't know. I don't want to say you should just have protective gloves on your kids and who they associate with, but you need to know them and know them well. Don't let your kid hang out with strangers, because that was what happened. My mother actually saw Alvin Morton once before this happened. She only saw him once, and she said, "Tim, I don't want you ever hanging out with that kid again." And this was 3 or 4 months before this happened. She only saw him once for a brief second. And if I'd have just listened, to my mother at that time, it's like, but you don't hear, it goes in one ear and out the other, in the sense of like, well, Mom, you don't know him, that,
Right.
but
She knew.
the 10 Commandments actually offer you a promise of protection that if you honor your mother and father, you'll live long in the land, and you'll prosper. It's like, if I'd have just honored my mother and father in that, I would have never had this situation.
Final question. How difficult is it for a life parolee to find employment once you get out?
I didn't find it difficult. There are many people that want willing people, honest people that are going to show up on time and do their job.
What are you doing now?
Right now, I'm doing garage doors installation and service, and also I'm helping a friend of mine remodel a house that he bought. So I'm doing a lot of hands-on work, but that's not all we're limited to. And for me, it's a pleasure to go out and go to work, to get out and see somewhere different, or to do things, and like, people are happy with the job you did, and they never look at me, they never ask, but I mean, they never look at me and assume that I'd been in prison 25 years or the things that are associated with the past. So I don't feel that stigma, and I'm sure there are some people that probably will. And so it's not going to be the same for everybody, but I don't think anyone that really wants to do work and is honest is ever going to have a problem.
Tim, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on Men Going Home. You're a good man, and you're a success story. Thank you so much for taking the time to travel here and be a part of this show.
My pleasure, Mr. Wolf.
Over the years, I've met hundreds of life-sentenced men who ended up in prison because they made bad choices and bad decisions. And what I've learned is that we are all just one bad decision from incarceration.